intellectually. All that could possibly be done intellectually has been done by the honest, sincere translators themselves. As we know, that which is called the human mind could not possibly understand or interpret the spiritual significance of this truth. The so-called human mind can understand nothing of itself because actually it has no genuine existence. Only the mind that is God can understand and interpret the truth that is God. It does take the mind that is God to understand and to respond to the truths that are God. Now we will go right into the wonderful gospel according to Thomas. Starting at the top of page 3. These are the secret words which the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote. And he said, whoever finds the explanation of these words will not taste death. He who perceives the spiritual significance underlying these words of Jesus will understand that there is no death, that there is no birth, that there is no change. He who understands the spiritual significance of these words will know that there is no body that is born, that can change, that can die. He who understands the spiritual significance of these words will know that God, eternal life, is alive, is living as his own individual life, and thus eternal life, the life that is alive as his life, cannot die. Quote, Jesus said, let him who seeks not cease seeking until he finds, and when he finds, he will be troubled, and when he has been troubled, he will marvel, and he will reign over all. To many of us, the search has seemed long, sometimes discouraging, sometimes filled with obstacles. Yet we have continued right on in this search. Why? Because we had no choice. We could not do otherwise. When this search has brought us to the standpoint of the ultimate, we realize that it has not been a search at all. Rather, it has been God who is our entire life, mind, consciousness being, who has been insisting upon revealing itself to itself as itself. And we discover then that this self is the only self in existence as our self. It reminds one of the search for the Holy Grail. All of us remember that story, how the searcher searched and searched and searched, and yet finally he discovered the Holy Grail right back from the place where he started. So it is with us. When we reach the standpoint of the ultimate, we realize that every truth that we have seemed to be seeking has always been included in and as our own consciousness, and that instead of a search, it has been God, our own consciousness, insisting upon revealing its allness, its completeness, its entirety as us. Now when Jesus said, and when he finds, he will be troubled, what he really means here is that when we begin to discover that we are every truth that we have seemed to be seeking, our seeming problems do not cease at this point. Rather, sometimes it would appear that the problems increase or seem for a little while to be more severe. But we who have learned to stand and stand and stand despite all the seeming troublesome appearances, do come to the point of marveling. We so often say, how wonderful this is. Can this really be true? We certainly do marvel. But the greatest marvel of all is that it has been so simple, that it has been our very own being, and we have not realized it before. And we do reign over all. We do know that what we know is power. In fact, we know that what we know is the only power there is or can ever be, because it is omnipotent mind, omnipotent intelligence, acting without opposition, without obstruction. It is in this wonderful consciousness of being that we can say, my kingdom is not of this world. Thus we can realize that we are not under any of the so-called laws and cruel beliefs of a world of matter, of a body of matter, of an experience of human relationships. Rather, we know that our kingdom is our consciousness, and our consciousness is the power of our universe, because our consciousness is our universe. Jesus said, if those who lead you say to you, see, the kingdom is in heaven, then the birds of the heaven will precede you. If they say to you, it is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. But the kingdom is within you, and it is without you. If you will know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will know that you are the sons of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty. Now this quotation of Jesus is given in two sections, and we will take up the first one first. If those who lead you say to you, see, the kingdom is in heaven. Now all of us are familiar with the old orthodox belief that God was a God far removed from us up in the heavens. Here Jesus is simply saying that if we believe that God is in the heaven and not where we are, that the birds are closer to God than we are. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He says, if you say it is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Well, here again Jesus is trying to reveal that if God seems either above or below us, but not our own being, the fish themselves are closer to God than are we. But he completes this when he says, but the kingdom is within you, and it is without you. Here Jesus is referring to the kingdom of God that is within the body, because it is the body, as well as the kingdom of God that is without the body, because it is all, because it is the universe itself. Jesus is not deceived into thinking or believing that the kingdom of God is any more without the body than it is within the body, because he realizes clearly that the kingdom of God is the heaven and the earth and the body itself. Now where he says, if you will know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will know that you are the sons of the living Father. What he really means is that in all of our seeming search, it has been the God identity that we are insisting upon revealing itself as ourself. If we know this identity as it is, we will know that we are both the Father and the Son, because the Father and the Son are the same one. And the living Father here means we will know that we are the life that is the Father, the life that is the Son, and that this life is exactly the same life, not two, but one, and one alone. Yes, if you know yourself, you know that you are the very life that is God. If you do not know yourselves, then you do not know God. Then you can certainly seem to be in poverty, just to the extent that we do not appear to know God. To that extent, we cannot be fully and completely aware of ourselves. That is indeed the only lack there could be. That indeed is the only poverty there could be. Poverty can only be a seeming failure to know that God is ourself, that God is the only existence, right here and now, as the self of you, of me, and of all. Actually, if we do not know ourselves, we don't know anything. If we do not know ourselves, we could not even exist, because the only existence there is God itself, identified as our own self-consciousness. If we do not know ourselves, if we do not know that God is all there is of us, God is all there is of the universe, we are not only in poverty, but we are poverty itself, because poverty would be non-existence, complete lack, complete absence of mind, of consciousness, of God. But we do know ourselves. Thank God we are increasingly knowing ourselves. Jesus said, "The man old in days will not hesitate to ask a little child of 7 days about the place of life, and he will live. For many who are first shall become last, and they shall become a single one." You know, that which is called birth seems to be the beginning of a dream or an illusion, that we live in a body of matter, in a world of matter, governed by material laws. Now, we will not stress the dream, knowing that it is nothing but illusion, and that nothing that appears in or as the dream is genuine, has any reality, has any actuality. Nonetheless, it is necessary to say this. The ones that we call children find it much easier, much simpler to perceive and to understand the truth than do those of us who seem to have been in what we call the dream for many years. Why is this? It is because they remember more. They remember more of what they were before the so-called dream, the illusion, began. When anyone who may, to all appearances, be old, is enlightened, he understands this truth. And he knows enough to know that the child of 7 days remembers more than he does. As a matter of fact, he would only ask the child in order to be reminded himself of just what he is, of the eternal, changeless aspect of God, which is his very being. Indeed, he is endeavoring to remind himself that there is no one old, no one young, there is no one in between, that there is no beginning, no change, no ending for God itself. Thus there is no beginning, no change, no ending for his specific identity, or God identified as his being. Jesus said, "Know what is in thy sight, and what is hidden from thee will be revealed to thee." How true this is. When we are able to see that which stands before us in the purity, the perfection, the beauty that it is, then that which seems to have been hidden will be revealed. When right where there seems to be density, we see light and light only, then that which seems to be hidden is revealed. When right where there seems to be imperfection, a blemish, a fault, sin, sickness, or even death, yes, and we can say birth too, when we can see that which is right before us as all of these fallacies, and see the beauty, the changeless perfection that is God, then there is no hidden beauty, there is no hidden God. There is only God evidenced, God manifested, and we know it. His disciples asked him, they said to him, "Wouldst thou that we fast, and how should we pray? And should we give alms? And what diet should we observe?" Now you will notice here that the disciples are asking about human means as an aid to attaining spirituality. But Jesus will have none of this. He turns them completely away from it in the following quotation. Jesus said, "Do not lie. Do not do what you hate, for all things are manifest before heaven. For there is nothing hidden that shall not be revealed. There is nothing covered that shall remain without being uncovered." When Jesus says, "Do not lie," he knows that the only lie there could be must be a lie to ourselves. What he is really saying is, do not deceive yourself. Abide in and as the truth that is your only self, rather than the deception that appears to be yourself. And when he says, "Do not do what you hate," he knows that within the consciousness of each and every one of us, there is an awareness of that which is right, good, loving, honest, justice, principle. In fact, he knows that the only consciousness of any one of us is God, who is all of these things. And what he means is, don't attempt to go against your feeling of that which is right. Don't attempt to go against God. Everything that you identify yourself with seems to be, or seems to become, your experience. Identify yourself as love, and you experience love because you are love. Identify yourself as principle, and your experience is a principled experience because God is principle, and you are what God is. Identify yourself with eternality, and you realize that you are eternal. Identify yourself as perfect life, and the life that is alive as your life right here and now is perceived to be perfection itself. This is what is manifested. This is what is evidenced, and this right here and now is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is in you. You are in the kingdom of heaven because the kingdom of heaven is your consciousness. I like the word consciousness for kingdom. The consciousness of your genuine, eternal, perfect, and only identity is heaven itself. Indeed, there is nothing hidden that shall not be revealed. There is nothing covered that shall remain without being uncovered. The truth, the fact of the very presence of perfection, eternal, changeless, is right here. It is evidenced, and it cannot be hidden. It is already revealed right here and right now. And that which appears to be matter cannot cover this truth. This truth is uncovered because the spiritual consciousness that is this truth is aware of itself and is aware of being this truth. Do you know, sometimes it seems as though there is a mirage here. Let's call the mirage that which seems to be a body of matter, material objects, and a world of matter. This mirage would appear to be something that could interpose itself between this glorious universe of spirit, God, and our realization of it. In fact, it would make, or tend to make us believe that that which we are seeing is dense, heavy, dark, imperfect, instead of light, beauty, and eternally perfect. It would appear to us sometimes that that which we call a body of matter could superimpose itself into our consciousness, that it could cover the genuine and only body of spirit, of life. It would seem that it could act as an obstruction to our seeing, to our perception of this body, this perfect, beautiful, glorious body of light that is right here. But what Jesus is trying to tell us here is that there is no body of matter, there are no material objects that can get in our way, that can conceal from us, hide from us, the true, the genuine, and the only universe, world, being, and body there is in existence. Indeed, there is nothing hidden. That which seems to be matter can hide no aspect of God. Neither can it hide God being all there is of us, including our bodies. And it is in this realization that that which seems to have been covered over with matter or material appearance or deception, that which actually exists is uncovered as we realize this truth, and the perfect, eternal, glorious body of light appears, is realized, is recognized, and is known to be the only body in existence. And this is just as true of the bodies of the stars and the planets, just as true of the bodies of the animals, the birds, the fishes, just as true of the body of anything that appears in form. I like the word design or delineate better than form, because it gives a better concept of the way these bodies really are when we see them as light, as consciousness, as beauty, as the glory that is God itself. Now there is a footnote on this next quotation, but we are going to stay right with the text just as it is given here. Jesus said, "Blessed is the lion which the man eats, and the lion will become man. And cursed is the man whom the lion eats, and the lion will become man." Now the lion is always referred to as strength, as power, as perfection, as the king of the kingdom, and so forth. Now, as we partake of this, as we realize this truth, it becomes our entire being. It becomes our very flesh. It becomes our very body. It becomes our experience. Not that it actually becomes all of these. It is that it has always been all of these, and we discover it to be our entire being. In fact, the truth itself is that which is called man, and we discover that we are this power, we are the king, we are the strength, we are the omnipotence itself. Just so long as there is no little self, no little pseudo identity or misidentity trying to be something of itself. But where Jesus said, "Cursed is the man whom the lion eats, and the lion will become man," what he really means here is that once we have realized the power of this truth, we cannot use this power selfishly. We cannot use this power to place ourselves upon a pedestal. We cannot use this power in an attempt to place ourselves above any other identity. All of us know those who have partaken of this truth, and then they've come to a point where they thought they could use this truth to gain their own personal ends. But this is wrong. We cannot use this truth to gain anything. We are this truth. If we are not this truth, we are nothing. We don't use our lives. Our lives are life itself. We cannot use this truth for any selfish purpose. Certain it is that we cannot use this truth in an effort to gain students or a following or to glorify ourselves. And he said, the man is like a wise fisherman who cast his net into the sea. He drew it up from the sea full of small fish, among whom he found a large and good fish. That wise fisherman, he threw all the small fish down into the sea. He chose the large fish without regret. Well, we might call this a case history of our own experience. All of us have gone through many of these so-called systems of metaphysics that were dual. We have accepted them, believed them, gone along with them, and every so often we would find some genuine truth that was our truth in them. We realize now that all these teachings have had their purpose in coming into our experience, and we're grateful for them, but we also realize that because they were incomplete, we could not stop with any one of them. And when we come to this point where we realize that God really is all really is God, and there is nothing in this universe that is not God being that, then we cast aside all the old dualistic approaches called metaphysics or whatever, and we accept only this one glorious truth. We have no regrets. We would not turn back if we could. Once having seen the light, the partial light does not interest us at all anymore. In other words, we discard all dualism for the complete truth. We go all the way. The truth is here impartially for each and every one of us. And we are willing to go all the way. Otherwise, we would not be at the standpoint of the ultimate, which means self-revelation or revelation from within the individual consciousness itself. Jesus said, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. He said, see, the sower went out. He filled his hand. He threw. Some seeds fell on the road. The birds came. They gathered them. Others fell on the rock and did not strike root in the earth and did not produce ears. Others fell on the thorns. They choked the seed and the worm ate them. Others fell on the good earth, and it brought forth good fruit, bore 60 per measure, and 120 per measure. Whoever is prepared to hear, let him hear. Now, we used to think that it meant it wouldn't do any good to present the truth to this one or to that one because of lack of receptivity. Well, now this is what reveals itself here. There is no one not actually ready for this truth. But it does seem as if there are different degrees of awareness of this readiness. Now, we are not disturbed. It makes no difference at all if our truth or the truth we reveal does not seem to bear fruit. It makes no difference if it is not understood or doesn't seem to be understood, or even if it is cast aside. This is all right, because they will accept, to some extent, they can't help it, they will accept up to the degree of their spiritual awareness anyway. And having spoken, that's our only concern, having spoken, having shared it, we rest in our consciousness that this activity, that is our sharing of this truth, this activity fulfills its own purpose. We are not responsible for the fulfillment of this purpose. We are not concerned about it. We know when to speak. We know when to keep silent because we are the intelligence that is God in action. We know what to say. We know what not to say. We are wise as serpents and harmless as doves, for we are love itself, but we are intelligent love, and we are loving intelligence. And in our sharing of this truth, we do find one here and one there who is full open, all ready to let his own consciousness of his God being reveal itself completely. Then we find that this one realizes his joy, his peace, his perfection, and not only that, he realizes them in abundance. There's a great abundance of all that is good in and as his experience, because he knows he is his own abundance. Jesus said, I have cast light upon the world, and see, I guard it until it, the world, is afire. What Jesus really means is, I am the light of the world. In me there is no darkness at all. And this is true of us, too. We are the light that lights the world in all of its seeming difficulties and darkness. We are the light that lights the world, and we guard it. We go right on being this light, no matter how difficult things may seem to be. We go right on guarding our light, being alert, being the light we are, until our whole universe is completely light. We are the light of our universe. What we are seeing right here is more powerful than all the summit meetings there can be, more powerful than all the political conventions there can be. This light that we are is the light that lights the world, until the world itself knows itself to be love, until the world itself knows itself to be at peace because it is peace, until the world itself knows itself to be indestructible, imperishable light. How true it is that the light Jesus knew himself to be, that lighteth the world, is the light that is still glowing, still shining, still active, enlightening the world, and there is nothing that can oppose it. Jesus said, this kingdom shall pass away, and the one above it shall pass away, and the dead are not alive, and the living shall not die. Yes, all that appears to be material or matter in form will be revealed as nothing. And the one above it, not matter, but so-called human mind or mortal mind, it also shall be revealed, and is being revealed, to be non-intelligence rather than intelligence. So it too is passing away, is disappearing into the nothingness which it has always been. That which seems to be a material universe, planets, stars, all of this passes away when we see there is no matter. Then there is the belief of material laws governing matter. There's also the belief in a mental hell and a mental heaven. This too passes away in our consciousness that each one of us is his own heaven and there is no hell. We need to know that there is no more a mental heaven than there is a material heaven. We see through all of that. We see that the only heaven there is our own consciousness. But we also see that this consciousness is the consciousness of everyone, everything in existence. And Jesus said, in the days when you devoured the dead, you made it alive. When you come into light, what will you do? Here Jesus is referring to matter as the dead. here he says, in the days when you seemed to drop into the dream, when the mirage appeared as matter, well, in those days, when you had made this acceptance of matter, you gave it all the life it ever had. Matter never had life of its own. The only life it ever seemed to have was the life it appeared to be in your acceptance of it. It is when you made nothing appear to be something. Then you were the one, or seemed to be, the one in the dream who gave it life. But when we come into light, when the light that is God is revealed as our own consciousness, we know that there is no matter to have life or to be made alive. Neither is there matter to be made dead. And Jesus follows this up by saying, on the day when you were one, you became two. But when you have become two, what will you do? Yes, you were already that one mind, that one consciousness, even when you seemed to be born. But at birth, it would appear that you became two, that you became dual, that you became life and body, soul and body. Then you accepted God and man. But when you seemed to become two, what did you do? The glorious eternal God identity that you had always been, and that actually you remembered yourself as being, just insisted upon revealing itself to itself as your being anyway. And this is what is going on right now. This is what we do, even when we seem to be two. The disciples said to Jesus, we know that thou wilt go away from us. Who is it who shall be great over us? Now right here, it is apparent that the disciples were thinking of Jesus as a person, as a personal master or leader, and feeling that Jesus must die or must depart from them. And they were also asking who then should be their master or their leader. In other words, right here it is apparent that they were thinking of a person as being a leader. They were thinking of a personal sense of the Christ, the truth, that was their own consciousness. Now Jesus perceived this, and he instantly tried to turn them away from a personal sense of this truth, or of its interpretation of itself. Instead, he said to them, wherever you have come, you will go to James the righteous. Now James is considered always to be the highest spiritual consciousness. Now, Jesus was trying to tell them that no matter to whom you might seem to turn, actually you are turning to the high spiritual consciousness, to the supreme one, only spiritual consciousness, which is your own consciousness. Certain it is that Jesus was not speaking of James as a person, but he was trying in the only way possible to reveal to them that they were to turn to their own consciousness of being God itself identified. Jesus said to his disciples, make a comparison to me and tell me whom I am like. Simon Peter said to him, thou art like a righteous angel. Now here Simon Peter is seeing Jesus as a human being. Not only that, he is seeing him as a good human being. But Matthew said to him, thou art like a wise man of understanding. Well, here Matthew is seeing Jesus as an intelligent man with intellectual understanding of good, of God. But Thomas, the spiritual identity now, you remember, Thomas said to him, Master, my mouth will not at all be capable of saying whom thou art like. How well Thomas knew that there was no way, there were no words with which to describe this spiritual God consciousness that was appearing right there as the one they were calling by the name of Jesus. Nevertheless, Jesus perceived that Thomas had called him by the name of Master. And you will recall that here he says, I am not thy master. And then he goes on to say, because thou hast drunk, thou hast become drunk from the bubbling spring which I have measured out. This statement of Jesus gives us a wonderful conception of that which we have called teacher. Here where he says, thou hast drunk, thou hast become drunk from the bubbling spring which I have measured out, what he really means is that thou hast already been and will always be the very same bubbling spring or spiritual consciousness that I have been pouring forth to you, to your perception. And this is the reason why he said, I am not thy master. Jesus well knew that he was no different, no other than the disciples. He knew that he was neither above them nor below them. He knew that he was exactly the same God consciousness identified that was identified as each disciple and as each one that could possibly ever exist. Jesus knew all this. Actually, he never placed himself in the position of master. Jesus never looked up at anyone, and neither did he look down at anyone. He knew better. He knew that he was not master. He knew that each one is his own master because each one is his own God being. The bubbling spring is also spiritual inspiration, and each one of us is our own spiritual inspiration. Each one of us is our own renewal. Each one of us is our own purity. And then Jesus took Thomas. He withdrew. He spoke 3 words to him. Now when Thomas came to his companions, they asked him, what did Jesus say to thee? Thomas said to them, if I tell you one of the words which he said to me, you will take up stones and throw at me, and fire will come from the stones and burn you up. Now what were the 3 words that Jesus spoke to Thomas? Those 3 words were the words that we can only speak when it is God himself speaking. They were, I am God. No so-called human being can speak these words. No so-called person can say, I am God. Only God can say, I am God. And when God speaks, when God says, I am God, it is then and then only that the mountains, so no matter what form they may in which they may appear, even mountains of what seems to be evil are shown to be nothing. It is only when, in complete illumination, we realize that of ourselves we are nothing, have nothing, know nothing, can do nothing. When we realize then that because God is, we are, and only because God is life can we be alive. Only because God is mind can we be intelligent. Only because God is life, truth, love, can we live, can we exist as fact, can we be loving. When we realize this, and only when we realize this, can we say, in the quiet of our contemplation, I am God. Now Thomas knew better than to tell this to the other disciples. He knew that they were still too occupied with the seeming personal sense of life to understand what he was saying. He also knew that if he told them, they would turn on him, they would try to destroy him. But he knew that the truth that he saw and was indestructible. He knew that the God that was his being could not be destroyed, but that rather the only destruction there is self-destruction. And he knew that their very effort to destroy him would seem to turn upon themselves and to destroy them. So Thomas very wisely refrained from telling them the words, the 3 words that Jesus had spoken to him. And herein, dear ones, is a great lesson for each and every one of us. The only destruction there can ever be is the illusion's destruction of the illusion, the mirage's destruction of the mirage, the dream's dissipation of the dream. But this never touches one of us. Actually, it never actually goes on. It has no basis in fact. It is entirely fiction with no truth in it. That dualistic sense that claims to be mortal or human man will always appear to turn on the one that says, I am God. Let us too be very wise, be wise as serpents, and never, never, never say, I am God, excepting in the silence of our full illumination. And then we know that it is not I that speaketh, but God that speaketh as us. Jesus said to them, if you fast, you will beget sin for yourselves. And if you pray, you will be condemned. And if you give alms, you will do evil to your spirits. And if you go into any land and wander in the regions, if they receive you, eat what they set before you, heal the sick among them. Here again, Jesus is trying to turn them away from all material sense of gaining or acquiring spiritual understanding. Here he says, if you fast, you must believe that by putting out matter or refusing to accept matter as food, you will become more spiritual. Jesus knew that any so-called materialistic means of acquiring spiritual consciousness was wrong, because it seemed to separate the one from the very consciousness that he already was and had. And when Jesus said, if you give alms, you will do evil, he knew that in the very giving of alms, that they were limiting the one to whom they gave. They were saying, I have something that this one does not have. So if I give alms, I am doing something that will give me a place in heaven. And isn't it too bad that they don't have as much as I do? But Jesus tells them to go into any land and wander in the regions, just to go about their daily affairs normally. Let their light shine, be what they are. Don't try to make your light shine. Jesus says in substance, be yourself. Go about your lives in a perfectly normal way, knowing that it is God that lives in you, through you, and as you. And don't attempt to be more of yourself by praying to a God outside yourself, or by fasting, or by giving alms. And he said, what goes into your mouth will not defile you, but what comes out of your mouth, that is what will defile you. He is saying in substance that you cannot take anything in from outside your own consciousness, for your consciousness is your universe. But he is also saying that if there appears to be evil within your consciousness, it will seem to appear not only as your body, as your mind, but it will seem to appear as your entire experience, as your universe. This, he says, is what will defile you. Whatever you seem to entertain in consciousness will seem to defile you. But thank God it never touches the God identity that you are. Jesus said, when you see him who was not born of woman, prostrate yourselves upon your face and adore him. He is your Father. Yes, indeed, when we can look at the one who stands right before us and see this one as he is, as God itself, as mind, as life, as consciousness, as soul, as light, appearing in form, when we can see this standing before us, rather than man with his breath in his nostrils who seems to be born of woman, then we can see God right before us. And we can adore this one because we adore God. Not that we adore a God outside our being. If we adore God, we adore ourselves. If we adore God, we adore everything and everyone. Jesus said, men possibly think that I have come to throw peace upon the world, and they do not know that I have come to throw divisions upon the earth, fire, sword, war. Jesus knew that there was no peace in duality. He knew there could be no peace so long as there was the belief, the dream, the illusion that there was God and man. He knew that there could be no peace so long as we seemed to be deluded that there was a material universe, a material world, and a spiritual universe, a spiritual world. He knew there could be nothing but war so long as there was the belief that there was a divine mind and a human mind. He knew that wars were inevitable in this kind of illusion. And he was trying to reveal the fallacy of any hope for peace until this truth is seen, that there is one universe, one world, one being, and this is God being. Jesus realized that always in duality there is the claim of division, of separateness. And here he goes on to say, for there shall be 5 in a house, 3 shall be against 2, and 2 against 3, the Father against the Son, and the Son against the Father, and they will stand as solitaries. Jesus knew that which we call the 5 senses is that which gives the report of duality to us. He also knew that it is because of these 5 senses that there seems to be divisions and separations in our existence. He knew that so long as there appeared to be human birth, there would also appear to be human relationships. And he knew that in these relationships there must be divisions, there must be inharmony so long as they were considered to be separate minds, separate consciousnesses, separate lives. He knew that this carried farther meant separate nations and separate religions and separate ideologies. He was trying to tell them that instead of 5 physical senses, instead of man with breath in his nostrils, instead of separation, there is one sense, which is soul sense. There is one consciousness. There are innumerable functions of this one consciousness. But there is one sense, and this is soul sense. This is spiritual consciousness, and there is no other consciousness. In this consciousness there is no separation, there is no division, no matter how many identities they are, and they certainly are infinite. It is still one consciousness, inseparable consciousness, as each and every identity. Therefore, there can be no human relationships, no relationships of nations, no relationships of planets, stars, and so forth. Jesus knew that as they realized this, they would be aware of the fact that they were this very one. Here he says, he goes on with this very same revelation in which he says, I will give you what eye has not seen, what ear has not heard, and what hand has not touched, and what has not arisen in the heart of man. Here Jesus is saying, I will help you to reveal from within your own consciousness the fact that the so-called 5 physical senses cannot reveal any truth to you. I will help you to realize that all the so-called senses can reveal is a mirage without substance, without life, without activity, without form. And I will also help you to know that there is no mortal or human mind, being, or body who knows anything, who can do anything, or who can be anything. The disciple said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." Jesus said, "Have you then discovered the beginning, so that you inquire about the end? For where the beginning is, there shall be the end." How well Jesus knew that they were still believing, that they were born, that they were alive as a life that was born into a body of matter, and that they would have to die out of matter or have an ending. He knew that if they didn't believe this, they wouldn't be inquiring about it. That's why he immediately turned them to the realization that there was no beginning. When he says, where the beginning is, there is the ending. What he is saying is, if there is beginning for you, there would have to be ending for you. If you were born, you must die. If you know no beginning, how can you know an ending? And then Jesus says, "Blessed is he who shall stand at the beginning, and he shall know the end, and he shall not taste death." In other words, Jesus is saying, blessed are we, blessed are you, blessed is everyone who right in the midst of what seems to be a human life, a mortal man with all of its difficulties and sorrows and sicknesses, births and deaths, when we, right in the midst of this dream, perceive that we are eternal, changeless, God identified right here and right now, we shall know that there can be no death, because we know that there is no birth. When we see this right here, instead of having to seem to pass through the experience called death in order to perceive it, when we see it right here, we realize that we never even have to pass through what appears to be the experience called death. And it's about time we woke up to this fact. It's been right here all the while. Jesus said, blessed is he who was before he came into being. Yes, indeed, blessed are we who know what we were before the so-called mirage, before the illusion called birth began. No wonder Jesus loved little children, because he knew that children remember more of what they were before the dream seemed to begin, and they really realize more that they are this God identified right here and right now than those of us who seem to have gone farther into the illusion. And then Jesus says, if you become disciples to me and hear my words, these stones will minister to you. How well he knew that if they really understood what he was saying to them, they would realize that everything they see is their own consciousness, that there is nothing outside their God being. They would see that no life is ever given to them, and no life is ever taken from them. They would see that nothing is ever given and nothing can be taken. Furthermore, if we really see what this is, if we know this truth and know ourselves to be this truth, we are aware that even that which seems to be the stones is our own substance. That which seems to be the activity of the stars, the planets, the earth, the activity of everything is our own activity, our own life. Even that which appears to be the most dense, dark, hard substance is recognized to be the very same consciousness, the very same spirit, the very same life that is our substance, and there is nothing withheld from us. This is a wonderful lesson for those who that they lack something, particularly for those who seem to feel that they lack the necessary supply to carry on normally. When we realize that our consciousness really is our universe, that we are, that is, our consciousness is everything that we see. Jesus said, "For there are 5 trees in paradise, which are unmoved in summer, in winter, and their leaves do not fall. Whoever knows them will not taste death." Here Jesus is again telling us that instead of 5 physical senses, reporting all sorts of false pictures to us, there is one sense, which is spiritual sense, which is God consciousness itself. Now he's always also telling us that when we are enlightened, that is to say, when we are in illumination, we see things as they actually are, rather than as they appear to be, so long as we seem to be seeing through that sense which is called human vision. This ability to see things as they are, rather than as they appear to be, is a spiritual function. Actually, it is this one consciousness, the spiritual consciousness, which is the only consciousness, functioning as that aspect of itself which we misinterpret to be vision. Jesus was aware of this. He knew that this is a spiritual faculty, and that it was equally present in and as each and every one of us. It was this that enabled Jesus to see right where the withered hand appeared to be, to see that perfect hand that needed no healing, that did not need to change in order to be the perfection that it already was. Spiritual consciousness functioning as vision or perception is that innate faculty which enables each and every one of us to see things in the perfection, in the perfect state in which they exist, rather than in some imperfect state which appears before us. That which is called matter cannot and does not interpose itself in this consciousness between us and that which we see. In the realization that that which we see is our own being, is actually our own consciousness, there is nothing called matter that can come in to separate us from the clear, right perception of that which we see. So often, illumination is referred to as though it was some great, mysterious experience, and something that could only be realized by a very few. Nothing could be farther than the truth. The only consciousness there is, actually, is enlightened consciousness. And illumination, enlightenment, is the consciousness of each and every one of us. Now this is the spiritual faculty. This is the Christ consciousness. And it is just as much your consciousness as it is mine, or as it is the consciousness of anyone else. If we believe the fallacy that someone else has this consciousness, and we do not have it ourselves, we are right then limiting ourselves, or rather denying our own spiritual consciousness. Instead of that, let us claim this consciousness, because it is ourself. It is perfectly right to claim your own God self. So let us claim our own spiritual faculty, of being able, right here and now, to see things as they are rather than as they appear to be. Now, any one of us who has ever experienced illumination, or, more simply put, enlightened consciousness, knows very well that in this enlightened consciousness, we never see anything that fades, anything that is in the process of destruction. We never see anything that is even in the process of beginning, of change, or of ending. It is an interesting fact that in illumination, one never sees a baby or a child, neither do we see an old person. All that we see is constantly at its very highest peak of perfection. We never see a withered leaf. We never see a withered blade of grass. We never see anything at all that can be interpreted as being imperfect. This, my dear ones, is the Christ consciousness. This is your consciousness. This is my consciousness. This is the consciousness that enabled Jesus to see the perfect hand, regardless of how many stood around and believed there was such a thing there as a withered hand. This is the consciousness that stood beside the bed and knew that the maid had not died, and knew that the body was life itself and could not die. This is the consciousness that said to the maid, arise, and it was seen to be true. In this consciousness there are no seasons. There is no coming, there is no going. And particularly there is nothing in the process of change. Anyone who is aware of having and even being this illumined consciousness cannot possibly believe that there is such a thing as death, because this one knows there is no such thing as birth. In this illumination we see, we know, we perceive the imperishable eternal nature of all substance. Here we know that there is no substance that is the kind of substance that can fade, that can change, that can wither, or that can die. The disciples said to Jesus, tell us what the kingdom of heaven is like. He said to them, it is like a mustard seed, smaller than all seeds. But when it falls on the tilled earth, it produces a large branch and becomes shelter for other birds of heaven. What Jesus is saying here is that there is nothing so small, so infinitesimal, but that is God, all that God is, being that. And he knows, Jesus knows, that in this realization there is also the revelation that the infinitesimal is the infinite, and the infinite is the infinitesimal. Mary said to Jesus, whom are thy disciples like? He said, they are like little children who have installed themselves in a field which is not theirs. When the owners of the field come, they will say, release to us our field. They take off their clothes before them to release it, the field, to them, and to give back their field to them. Here there is something that was not given pertaining to the last quotation that must now be said. So we will go back to that last quotation concerning the mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is the universe itself. The kingdom of heaven is the stars, the planets, the infinite beauty and stillness of the desert, the ocean, the earth. All that is heaven. But heaven is also the smallest grain of sand. There is not so much as a pinpoint in eternity or infinity that is not the kingdom of heaven. There is not so much as a pinpoint in you, in me, or in anyone that is not the kingdom of heaven. Everything, even from what the world would call a cell, a body cell, or any other kind of a cell, to a planet in the sky, has its purpose in being. It is love fulfilling its purpose. It is love providing its own protection, its own defense against all the pretensions of what claims to be a material world, a material body, or a human being. Now, back to Mary's question, whom are thy disciples like? And Jesus said they're like little children who've installed themselves in a field which is not theirs. Well, isn't it true that each and every one of us has said these truths when we had not really made them our own? This is the fields that are not theirs. How long we have said, God is all, God is all, and still we have not really been fully aware of the truth we were saying. Or we have claimed this truth as though we were claiming it from outside our own being, but we have not really come into a consciousness that it is our being. So it was with the disciples. But then Jesus goes on to say, when the owners of the field come, they will say, release to us our field. And how true this is. When our genuine and only identity, our spiritual identity, asserts itself, which it does and is doing, we then refuse to surrender our identity to something that appears to claim the power to rob us of our God identity. No longer do we surrender the field, which is our being, our consciousness, to the so-called material sense of life. And then Jesus goes on to tell us how all this is accomplished. He says, they take off their clothes before them to release it, the field, to them, and to give back their field to them. Here the expression, take off the clothes, means that we simply discard all the old dualistic arguments, the affirmations and denials, all the dualism of God and man, mind and idea, and go in and possess the land. It is already ours, you know. The children in the field own it themselves, just as we are self-possessed, capital S, so long as we know that it is God's self-possessed. Now, the owner of the field is the genuine identity. We don't need to make these declarations of truth about ourselves. Once we discover that we are the truth, we are the very truth we have been saying. This completely eliminates any fallacy that we have to add knowledge, even spiritual knowledge, to ourselves in order to have and to be what we already are. This does away with leaders and followers, teachers and students. This is the revelation that each and every identity is complete within itself because it is God complete as that specific identity, needing nothing from anyone else or from any other source. Jesus said, if the Lord of the house knows that the thief is coming, he will stay awake before he comes and will not let him dig through into his house of his kingdom to carry away his goods. You then must watch for the world. Gird up your loins with great strength, lest the brigands find a way to come to you, because they will find the advantage which you expect. Here Jesus is saying that once we are enlightened, once we are free completely of dualism, We stay awake, we stay alert, and that these subtle arguments or appearances of evil cannot enter our house or our kingdom. Kingdom is consciousness, to rob us of our God consciousness, of our God identity. But Jesus is also warning us here not to make anything of the dream, because you will notice that he says, they will find the advantage which you expect. Well, of course, if we are believing that the dream actually exists, or that there is a dreamer, we are expecting certain things to appear in this dream. But if we are wide awake, and if we have known that we've always been awake, that there has never been a dream, and that we have never been a dreamer, we cannot not possibly expect anything to appear in or as a dream. Once we are completely enlightened, we know that there is no dream, there is no dreamer, there is no illusion, there is no deluded one, there is no such mind, there is no such consciousness. We don't make anything of the dream. Once we've acknowledged that there does seem to be, or to have been, a dream, we stop this thing of honoring it. Once we know a thing, we don't have to go on knowing it and knowing it and knowing it all over again. We know it. It is our consciousness. That's all there is to it. It is just the same as the fact that we know that twice 2 is 4. Any time that it is essential that 4 or that twice 2 be active in our experience, here it is. Twice 2 is 4. But we don't go around all the time insisting that twice 2 is 4. And now, for instance, if a mistake should appear, and someone would tell us that twice 2 was 7, why, we just know better. We don't go around day after day after day saying, well, twice 2 is not 7, or this is just a dream, or this is a mistake. We just know twice 2 is 4, and that's all there is to it. So let us do this very same thing in regard to this thing that we call dream. Let's not honor it, let's not dwell with it, let's not make it seem to be real by continuing to acknowledge that it appears to be, that it even appears to be something. We know it's nothing, that's all there is to it. We have already girded up our loins with great strength, because we already know what God is. Knowing what God is, we know what we are. Now Jesus said, let there be among you a man of understanding. When the fruit ripened, he came quickly with his sickle in his hand. He reaped it. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. The sickle represents our readiness. We are ready. We stand prepared to see through the fallacy of any claim, any appearance of inharmony, and to see the perfection that is right there before us, right in the very place, you might say, where the inharmony has seemed to be. Jesus saw children who were being suckled. He said to his disciples, these children who are being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom. What Jesus is conveying here is that these children remember what they were, they know more what they are, and they are like those of us who are awake, who are aware of what we are, what we have been, what we will always be. And this next revelation is perhaps one of the greatest, one of the most beautiful, one of the most complete of any that have been revealed here in this gospel according to Thomas. Now the disciples said to him, shall we then, being children, enter the kingdom? Jesus said to them, when you make the two one, when you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, and the above as the below, and when you make the male and the female into a single one, so that the male will not be male, and the female not be female, when you make eyes in the place of an eye, and a hand in the place of a hand, and a foot in the place of a foot, an image in the place of an image, then shall you enter the kingdom. What does it mean to enter the kingdom? It means to be completely conscious. It means to be aware as that spiritual consciousness, that spiritual faculty of perception that knows itself and all to be just what God is and nothing else. When you make the two one, in other words, when you can look right at what the world calls a body of matter and see a glorious, beautiful, perfect, changeless body of light, of spirit, a glorious body, then you have already entered the kingdom. When you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, the above as the below, all right, here it is. When you know that the substance that is the body is God, conscious, life, mind, intelligence in form. But when you know that this substance that is the body is not confined or restricted to the body, that it is the above and the below, the outer as well as the inner, that it is the universe itself, then you have already entered the kingdom. Now you may be questioning, how is it possible for the inner and the outer to be the same? How is it possible for the substance, the essence of the body, to be the very same substance, the very same essence that is the heavens itself? Well, let us remember one of the Bible verses in which God says, do not I fill heaven and earth, saith the Lord? And you will remember David, the psalmist, singing, whither shall I go from thy spirit? Whither shall I flee from thy right hand? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. We all know that God does fill the heaven and the earth because God is the heaven and the earth. The substance, the essence, is exactly the same. The substance that is the heavens is the substance that is the earth. The substance that is the heavens, that is the earth, is the substance that is the body. Now, in case this is not quite clear, let us take what we would call a human comparison. Now, any so-called human comparison is bound to be somewhat faulty because there is no matter that we can use as a basis for comparison. But this may help to clarify this at any rate. For instance, right in this room, there are several lamps, several electric light globes. Now, the light that is within each globe is the light that is outside each globe. Let's not think at all about the light element or anything to do with what would look like a material element at all. But the light that is within the globe, the light that is without the globe, is identically the same light. And right here is another point that might be helpful in this realization. It would be utterly and completely impossible to divide the light that emanates from one lamp from the light that emanates from another lamp in this room. There is one light in this room. Now, one might compare the light that is within the globe to the light that is the body. Now, unless something calls our attention for some reason to the shape or the form of the globe itself, we're not even aware of the globe. We just, of course, we know there's a globe there, but we don't make a point of it at all. We just know there's light, that's all. Now, the form of the globe is really inconsequential. Yes, there is form. But the light that is within the form is the very same light that is without the form. And thus it is that the inner and the outer, the above and the below, are exactly the same one. Now, each lamp, for instance, is distinctly that lamp and no other. Each light that is within the lamp is distinctly that light. Yet at the same time, it is the one light and no other. There is no material light. All light is immaterial. All light is spiritual, free completely of density. It is in this same way that we see that the consciousness that is the male is exactly the same consciousness that is the female. Surely the male is distinctly that function of consciousness. The female is distinctly that function of consciousness. Yet it is exactly the same consciousness. The male is that aspect of consciousness, even as the female is that distinct aspect of consciousness. But it is the same consciousness. Yes, and when we see that the function of the male and the function of the female is not to create children, it is not to bring about a continuation of human beings in or with bodies of matter, when we see that this function is to be one, which it already is, this is marriage, and this is beautiful. And when we understand this, we are already in the kingdom of heaven, and we are conscious of always having been, not only in the kingdom of heaven, but we are conscious of always having been the very kingdom of heaven itself. It is in this spiritual consciousness, this enlightened consciousness, that we are able to look right at the thing that it, or the one that appears before us, with what might seem to the world to be material vision. But we see it with the spiritual eye, with the eye that perceives it as it is. And when we see that right in the place where there seems to be a hand of matter, there is a hand, but it is a hand of spirit, a hand of consciousness, a hand of life, a changeless, perfect, beautiful hand. And when we see that there is a foot, a spiritual foot, not a foot of matter, and when we see that there is an image, a body, right in the place where there seems to be a body of matter, there is this spiritual body, this body of spirit, this body of consciousness, indeed this body that is God in form. Right here and right now, we realize that we are in the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is in us because we are the kingdom. We are our own universe. We are the power, the consciousness that is always in control, that reigns supreme within our own universe, because we are self-governed. The kingdom of God is our kingdom, and we know it, and we are the king of our kingdom. Jesus said, I shall choose you 1 out of 1,000 and 2 out of 10,000, and they shall stand as a single one. Now this certainly sounds as though there was partiality, as though one could be chosen and another left out of the kingdom of God. Well, of course, this is impossible. Jesus did not choose us. Each and every one of us chooses to reveal himself as he is. And who is it that chooses to reveal itself? It is God, choosing to reveal itself as itself. It is true that there are not many, in comparison with what you might call the world population, who are seeing this truth all the way as we are. It is true that we could be called few in numbers, but that is of no importance at all. We have open consciousness fully to this point. Many of what we call the metaphysical systems have much, much bigger crowds. There are many who have great, great followings, but this is not destined to be a popular thing. But there is infinite power in what we are seeing. You know, the Bible says, where two or more are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. And even though we may seem to be few in number, in my name, recognizing that God is our identity, the I that is the power, the I that is omnipotence itself, is right here, active and omnipotently active as each and every one of us. And it has its purpose in being us, and it fulfills its purpose through its omnipotent activity, which is our omnipotent activity. His disciples said, "Show us the place where thou art. It is necessary for us to seek it." Well, here you can see that the disciples were believing that Jesus was in a different place, a different situation than they were. They were believing that he had something that they didn't have, and that they must find it in order to have it, that they must discover it someplace from without themselves, someplace outside themselves. Now this follows beautifully that which has been said just before this, in which the genuine meaning was the Christ I am appears as one here and as one there, but still it is the only one. Now what Jesus is saying is the Christ is everyone. The Christ is everywhere as each and every one of us. You notice that Jesus said, whoever has ears to hear, that is, whoever is prepared to hear, whoever hears with this inner ear, this spiritual consciousness, let him hear. And then he says, within a man of light, there is light, and he lights the whole world. When he does not shine, there is darkness. Now, isn't this beautifully impersonal? Jesus claims no Christ for himself, but he does not claim for each and every one of us. He says, the Christ light does light the world. There is no darkness in this light. That darkness is the delusion. Jesus says that as we shine, as this Christ light shines as our light, it does reveal itself to be the light that is the world, the universe, our own consciousness, our own experience, our own body, and the substance, the essence, the life, the consciousness that exists as all that exists in this universe. You know, this is the answer to what they call absent treatment. It is in this revelation that the Christ is everywhere and everyone that we perceive that there is no absent treatment. There could be no absent treatment. It couldn't be. Now, instantly, our attention is focused upon anyone. That one, we realize, is within our own consciousness because that one is our own consciousness. Thus, we are where that one is where we are, and there is no division, no separateness in our consciousness. How then can it be called absent treatment? The Christ consciousness is not confined or restricted to or by anyone. It is the same consciousness, the same Christ, and even though someone calls on what he considers to be another one for help, actually he is simply appealing to his own Christ consciousness, to his own consciousness, to the consciousness that he is. If there were such a thing as absent treatment, it would be impossible to know that the so-called treatment reached anyone. It might reach and it might not. That's the thing, that's the fallacy. That's the thing that's wrong about this thing of directing thoughts or anything like that. So long as we believe that there is anyone who is other than the very same Christ consciousness that we are also going to accept the accompanying fallacy that says that this consciousness can be clouded, this consciousness can be diluted into to the acceptance of the illusion that there's something wrong, that it's ill, that it's lonely, that it's in lack, that it's suffering, that it's fearful, all sorts of things. But once we know that the very same consciousness that is our consciousness is the consciousness of the one who has even called for help, and know that there is no separation in consciousness itself, we know there is no absent treatment, and there certainly isn't the possibility of a treatment or so-called treatment being misdirected. Incidentally, treatment is not a very good word. I don't like the word treatment. I like conscious, omnipresent, omnipotent perfection, realized, revealed, manifested, and evidenced right here and right now. This is all there is to treatment. Incidentally, in the foregoing quotation, Jesus is saying, each and every one is his own light, and in us there is no darkness. Then Jesus goes on to say, love thy brother as thy soul. Guard him as the apple of thine eye. Isn't this wonderful? Yes. Love thy brother because thy brother is thy very self. The soul, the consciousness that is thy brother, is the consciousness that is thyself. Loving thy brother, thou art loving thyself. This is what Jesus is saying here. The opposite of this would be true too. If it were possible to hate yourself, you would be hating your brother. If you hate your brother, you would have to hate yourself. We should love ourselves just as we love our brother. Every time we seem to criticize ourselves, every time we seem to condemn ourselves, every time we say, I am stupid, or I have no understanding, or I'm so dense, we are saying it about God, who is ourself. We're saying it about our brother too, you see. Claim your God self. Never criticize yourself. This is particularly true about remembering a past for which one condemns oneself. The very fact that you are condemning yourself would be absence of the love that is already here. It is all right when you know that it is God loving himself. Indeed, we must love ourselves, even as we love our brother, but it has to be this impersonal love. And right now, I'm going to tell you something that has revealed itself recently. We must love the body. Now, this does not mean, of course, that we are to love a body of matter. There is no body of matter. But we know how anything that we love responds to that love. We know if we love our flowers, our plants, how they bloom, how they smile, how gloriously beautiful they are as we love them. We know if we love our animals, our birds, our fish, we know the response that's right here and now. Because love cannot resist love. Because love responds to itself. And we must love our bodies not with a personal love, but with and as the very same love that we love our pets, that we love our gardens, that we love our friends, that we love the beauty of a sunset, that we love all that God is. We must love our bodies. Sometimes you hear someone say, oh, we have to get rid of this body. This is one of the most vicious misconceptions that there could be. Because if we want to get rid of something, we certainly can't love it. So often when the body seems to be inharmonious, in some way. There seems to be a tendency to resent it, even sometimes to hate it, that sort of thing. But, oh my friends, neither hate nor resentment ever revealed the perfect body of light and perfection and glory that is right here and right now as your body and mine. Love reveals itself as loveliness. Love reveals itself as perfection, as beauty, as what it is, as God. So love the body as impersonally as you love God, as you love your plants, or anything that you see. Love everything that you see. Love everything that is within your consciousness, which is your universe, including your body. Jesus said, the mote that is in thy brother's eye thou seest, but the beam that is in thine eye thou seest not. When thou castest the beam out of thine eye, then thou wilt see clearly to cast the mote out of thy brother's eye. Well, the interpretation of this is a long, long way from the old orthodox interpretation of this quotation from the Bible. If we seem to see something wrong with our brother, that something wrong is within our own consciousness. Our consciousness is what we are. So that something wrong would have to be something wrong with us. Now, once we see that there is no one who has something wrong with him, then we are seeing clearly, and we are seeing that there is no imperfection within either our brother or ourselves, because in this we are seeing that God alone is. God alone is identified, and in God, as God, there is no imperfection, there is no mote in the brother's eye, no beam in our eye. In fact, there is nothing to be cast out. Jesus said, if you fast not from the world, you will not find the kingdom. Well, this is true. To fast is to do without. To fast is to refuse to take in. To fast is to abstain from partaking of the illusion, the delusion of birth, materiality, change, death. Once we are enlightened, none of these subtle illusions can find any response in us, and we are our own immunity to any of their fallacious claims. In this we have already found the kingdom. We have already discovered that we are this consciousness. And then Jesus goes on to say, if you keep not the Sabbath as Sabbath, you will not see the Father. Well, what is the Sabbath? The Sabbath is a holy day. The day is the light. Unless we see that the darkness and the light are both alike, and that the light is all there is no darkness. Unless we see and keep this holy day, this holy light, consciously, constantly, without interruption, we are not going to see that God is what we are, and we are what God is. In other words, we will not see that the Father is our own self. Jesus said, I took my stand in the midst of the world, and in flesh I appeared to them. I found them all drunk. I found none of them athirst. Yes, Jesus could even take on the appearance of what appeared to be, or what seemed to be, a body of flesh, a body of matter. He could even appear to those who seemed to be dreaming. as another human being. He did this because it was necessary in order to help them remind themselves of what they already were. And then he says, I found them all drunk. Well, to be drunk means that they were not themselves. No one is himself when he is drunk. And then he says, I found none of them athirst. Well, he found that they were seemingly so deluded by the things of this world that they were not open, they were not choosing to know what they were. Then he says, my soul was afflicted for the sons of men. Yes, don't we too yearn sometimes to help those who believe themselves to be sons of men, who believe themselves to have been born into a world of trouble, into a body of matter that can be sick, that can pain, that can suffer, deteriorate, and die. Yes, we too sometimes seem to be afflicted. We yearn to help them. But Jesus says, because they are blind in their heart, you see. Jesus knew that the only blindness there is would have to be a seeming lack of consciousness of what we are. And Jesus says they do not see that empty they have come into the world, and empty they seek to go out of the world again. Empty means seemingly devoid of spiritual awareness. It would seem that at birth they were unaware of what they are, and that empty they must go out of the world. If we continue on in what seems to be the illusion until the fallacy of death overtakes us, empty we seem to go out of the world. But we are not deluded. We are not drunk. We are ourselves. We are awake. And then Jesus says, when they've shaken off their wine, then will they repent. Well, of course, when we come to ourselves and know ourselves as we are, that's all there is to it. There's nothing more that has to be done. Actually, even this is not a doing. It is a conscious being. Jesus said, if the flesh has come into existence because of the Spirit, it is a marvel. Yes, if a body of matter could come forth or come into existence from Spirit, it would certainly be most peculiar. But then Jesus goes on to say that if the Spirit has come into existence because of the body, it is a marvel of marvels. Yes, but how more peculiar it would be, how much more peculiar it would be if Spirit, mind, life, truth, consciousness, God were dependent upon the appearance of a body of matter in order to exist, in order to be what it is. This indeed would be most peculiar, the marvel of marvels. But then he said, but I marvel at how this great wealth has made its home in poverty. What a beautiful, beautiful statement. How this great wealth, this infinite, conscious, perfect, eternal, uninterrupted beauty, glory that is God, should seem to be confined, compressed, restricted, boxed off in what appears to be a body of matter. Isn't that a beautiful realization? Yes, the marvel of marvels is that with all the fullness and purity and glory and perfection that we are, we should seem to have dreamed a body of matter that was subject to disease, to sickness, to deterioration, death, and destruction. Right here, where this body of matter seems to be, right here is this glorious, free, perfect, eternal, birthless, deathless, changeless body. Jesus said, where there are three gods, there are gods. Where there are two or one, I am with him. Here he is saying, whether there are many or few, it is not important. It makes no difference. It is the same Christ being each and every one of us. The same I identified as each and every one. Jesus said, no prophet is acceptable in his village. No physician heals those who know him. Why would not a prophet be acceptable in his own village? Why would not one be able to have his perfection revealed to him from one that he knows or thinks he knows so well? Well, because when we seem to be acquainted with someone, we're so much more liable to think of them as a human being, a human born of matter, of human mothers, human fathers, subject to all the weaknesses and the fallacies that we are. We are so busy looking at what seems to be a human that we fail to perceive the God being that is standing right before us. This is what that means. Jesus said, a city being built on a high mountain and fortified cannot fall, nor can it be hidden. Well, it is true that we are still being fortified. It is true that revelation after revelation is still taking place, is still going on within and as our own consciousness. No one of us claims to see or to be aware that we are all of this truth right now, yet we are. But to be fortified means to fortify ourselves rather, means to be doing just exactly what we are doing right now. Aren't we fortifying ourselves? Aren't we realizing our own strengths, our own power, the purity of perfection that we are? Aren't we learning to love our own self more? Aren't we learning to love the one who is called our brother more? Aren't we having a greater and greater realization that God is the all, the of all, as all, no matter what form it may appear before us in? No, we are learning all this. We are really realizing all this. Aren't we learning to place a value on our own selves? Is this egotistical? No. It is diametrically opposite from the value that we might place on ourselves as a human being. When we are loving ourselves, capital S, we are glorifying God. The city that is on an hill. This is our fortification. This is our defense. This is our own immunity to all the delusions and illusions of what would appear to be a human or a mortal being. Jesus said, what thou shalt hear in thine ear, and in thine other ear, that preach from the housetops. Now we know what this other ear is. It is that spiritual faculty of hearing. When we hear spiritually, we recognize that we are hearing our own self, our own consciousness. It is then that we can speak with power, we can speak with authority, because we're not speaking as a human being, we're not speaking as a mortal. When we hear with the ear of consciousness, instead of a so-called mortal ear that can hear almost, or seem to hear, almost anything, either good or bad. It is when we hear in this way that we hear truly. You'll remember that Jesus said in substance, what I hear, that I speak. And this I can tell you with all sincerity. I speak only that which I hear. Constantly, I listen. And it is only as God speaks that the words can be spoken. But first they must be heard with that other ear. First they must be heard as this spiritual consciousness, which is God, God aware of being itself, God aware of expressing itself, God aware of revealing itself, even as the words that are spoken. And then Jesus says, for no one lights a lamp and puts it under a bushel, nor does he put it in a hidden place, but he sets it on the lampstand, so that all who come in and go out may see the light. You will notice here that Jesus does not say that the one who lights the lamp sets himself upon the lampstand. He doesn't say that the one who lights the lamp places himself upon a pedestal. Rather, he says it so impersonally that he places the light upon the lampstand. And it is true that we cannot hide what we see. We cannot hide what we are. You know, we don't have to say a thing is true just because we know it is true. We don't have to say we see a thing or a truth just because we see it. If we are seeing it, we are being it. And those who come in contact with us, those whom we meet, aren't going to know that we are being this truth, whether we say a word or not. They feel it. They sense it. How can they help it? Actually, aren't they seeing themselves? Aren't they sensing their own being? Wherever you go, whatever you do, you are this light. You can't help being it if you are actually seeing it. And when others see this light, they might think that it is a human being. They might think it's a nice personality or anything else. But it makes no difference. It is this light. And ultimately, they are going to have to recognize it for what it is, because they are going to have to see that it is their own light, that it is the light that is their consciousness. But it does take the light, capital L. It does take the light to see the light. So you see, it is being the light that is seeing the light, just the same as it is seeing the light that is being the light. Jesus said, if a blind man leads a blind man, both of them fall into the pit. Well, if anyone tries to lead anyone, they're way off the beam. No one can be led into this truth. No one can be pushed into this truth. Anyone who considers himself or herself a leader, who can lead those whom he considers to be blind, is surely deluding himself. Anyone who places himself upon a pedestal, hoping that others will look up to him, is sure to topple. Pedestals have a habit of becoming top-heavy, and great is the fall thereof. No one can look down at anyone. In fact, one would have to be blind in order to be deluded that he could lead another. Now Jesus said, it is not possible for one to enter the house of the strong man and take him, or it, by force, unless he bind his hands. Then will he ransack his house. There is something more revealing itself here pertaining to the blind, leading the blind. Here it is. Can anyone who is dreaming or seems to be dreaming awaken another dreamer? No one who seems to be steeped in the belief that we are in a world of matter can possibly awaken another one who seems to be steeped in this same belief. That is to say, that it is absolutely essential for us to be able to walk around in what seems to be the dream, but wide awake if we are to even seem to help anyone else to awaken from this same dream. Now this is why we do not, it doesn't make any difference how much compassion we may have for someone who seems to be in great difficulty. It just isn't possible for us to realize ourselves to be this great light enough to awaken them unless we know ourselves that this is a dream and that we are awake. But furthermore, we have to know that they too are awake, that they are untouched by the dream, and that there is no dream and no dreamer. Now, this doesn't mean that we're cruel. We don't say anything unloving. We don't say such a thing as, oh, well, this is just your imagination, or snap out of it, or anything like that. We say the loving thing, we say the compassionate thing, and we do that which is loving, but just the same, we stand in this spiritual consciousness which realizes that there is nothing going on but God. And now let us return to Jesus' statement that it isn't possible for one to enter the house of a strong man and take him unless he bind his hands. Then he can ransack his house. You know, it wouldn't be possible for us to seem to be under all the beliefs of a human life, or the troubles and the difficulties of man with breath in his nostrils, if we had not seemed to be bound by being born, by the belief, the illusion, the dream of birth. We could not think death inevitable if we had not been duped into believing that we were born. This very claim, the lie, the fallacy that says we are born, is that which seems to bind us. And incidentally, it is this very illusion that would ransack our house, that would seem to rob us of our harmony, rob our bodies of their peace, their perfection, their permanency, their eternality. It is this very claim that would empty us, make us a vacuum, make us ignorant, make us unconscious of what we really are. In fact, it is this very same illusion or delusion that would make us nothing. And that is just what death would have to be if there were death. It would be nothing, non-existence. Jesus said, it is not possible for one to enter the house of a strong man. But he also said, take no thought from morning until evening, and from evening until morning, for what you shall put on. Now what Jesus means here is that we are not to avoid or try to avoid this dream or so-called dream by thinking, by reasoning, by making arguments, by making affirmations or denials. What Jesus is telling us here is that all that is necessary is that we be conscious of what we are, that we know what we are, and that we be what we know, and that we be this continuously.
I hope you enjoy this spiritual audio. Like, share and subscribe for more.